This video is going to take a quick look at the Modus scan tool. The Modus scan tool is kind of a cool one. It has a lot of different functions on it. If you look up here at the top, you've got a 4-channel oscilloscope, so you can plug into and use it just kind of like we were doing with the Auto Ingenuity or the Pico. And so this actually has an oscilloscope function as well on it. And then it's got a few other features on there. You're going to check it out of the tool room with a cable that you have to plug in. And then it just plugs into the DLC as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and turn it on, the on button here. And one of the things I like about Snap-on's scan tools is they're pretty easy. You got 3 buttons basically. Yes, no, up, down, side, side. And that's pretty much what you got. So once the Pico comes on, it takes a minute for it to boot up. It's going to ask you what you want to go into. Now we talked a little bit about global OBD2 and US domestic. So US domestic would be the factory version of this scan tool, and then the global would be the generic version. So that's what it means by global and domestic. If you were looking at a Honda, it'd be Asian. European would be, BMW and those kind of things. So there is a demo mode on these, so you can click on that and it'll go through several demos. So if there's some feature that you want to learn how to use, you can do that. Let's go ahead and we'll just plug in the car that we're working on. So I'm going to use the side-to-side button over here, and that'll highlight the previous vehicle, or we can just go to US domestic, and then we're going to choose what kind of car we're dealing with here. So whoops, go back up here to US domestic, and we're going to come down here, we're going to choose a Pontiac, which is down here. And it'll load it in, and when you're in US domestic, this is where you're going to, sometimes it'll grab the VIN number, but sometimes you have to put the entire information in there. So I'm going to try the automatic ID. I like to do that just simply because it's easier a lot of times. So we'll click yes on the automatic ID. And it says that we need a number 17 key. Now on these, on the Snap-on scan tool, they do have keys. So I'll show you what they look like here. So on the cable you have an adapter like this, and it's got a slot in it, and then attached to the cable we have all these keys. So we find the one that says 17. So there's 14, 15, 16, there's the 17 key. Okay, so when you install this into the adapter here, it doesn't take a lot of brute force. They install real simply, and they are keyed, so you can only go in one direction. So you see right there, we're going to slide this in just like that. So now the key is installed, so we can plug this back into the DLC. And looks like my battery is extremely low on the scan tool, so we're going to continue. We might have to hurry this up a little bit. So so yes to continue, and it'll hopefully grab the VIN number and have everything all ready. There it is. There's our VIN number. It's 2002 Pontiac, 3.4 liter V6, sequential fuel injection. So we're all good. So we're going to say yes to that. So now what I want to do is there's several different menu options here. Engine, that goes in and looks at your PID list. So it says no adapter key, so you can pull the 17 key out and go into there. We'll go in that in a minute. So I'm going to go back, and then it'll go to transmission. You can look at stuff in the transmission, analog brakes, airbags, body control module, instrument cluster, keyless entry, service reset, and tire pressure monitors. So it gives you all that stuff. So let's go back to the engine. And we're going to click on that, and it's going to tell us no key is required. So I'm going to pull the key out of the slot that we installed just a minute ago. And once that's done, we can click on here with yes. Okay, come on. There we go. The codes menu. So if I want to read the codes on the car, click on that and display codes. So all powertrain codes, we'll go ahead and click on that. So you see this right here? It picked up 2 powertrain codes that the Auto Ingenuity didn't. But we just did a light scan with the Auto Ingenuity if you looked at that video. This one here is a more deeper scan. So we've got a P0122 and a P012 or P01122, which are both throttle or TP or AP sensor voltage, circuit low. So that could be because the battery went dead. So we're going to back up out of this. We can look at history codes. Now history codes are codes that have occurred but they're not occurring now, and so they're in history. And there we go, got the same code in history. These are the drive cycles. So these are how many tests have failed this ignition cycle, and we'll talk a little bit more about that too as we move along. So last test failed, and then let's back up one more screen. So I'm going to hit no again. So that's display codes. Down here it'll ask you to clear codes. So I'm going to go ahead and clear these codes. Actually, before I do that, let's look at freeze frame and failure records. Click on that. And it'll ask you which freeze frame and failure records you want to look at for which code. So we're going to try this generic code here, this P0122. So we'll click yes on that. And it should give me a PID list. There it is. PID list of everything that was occurring when this code set. So mileage, no, nothing there. So we can scroll down. Whoops. The engine speed was at 0 RPM, so the engine was not running. IAC position was at 116. Coolant temperature was at 68 degrees Fahrenheit, which is approximately room temperature. And mass airflow sensor was 182 grams per second. Barrel reading was 30. So you can scroll through all of this and you can see what was happening with all of the sensors. We were in open loop right there. So you can see what was happening when that code was set. And that's what I was mentioning in class a few days ago about freeze frame and failure records and how important they can be. So, and if we go down here to DTC status, that'll actually tell you, you plug in the DTC that you want to look at, and it'll tell you whether or not the monitor has been run on it and all that kind of stuff. And you'll understand more about that as we move along through the quarter. So let's go up here to clear codes. And ignition key on, engine off, and then it asks, are you sure you want to clear these codes? And I'm going to say yes. And it says codes were cleared successfully. So now if I back up out of here, I can go back up here to display codes and all powertrain codes, and it should have no codes. So I was successful. I actually did erase all the codes, so we're all good. So let's go back up a few more menu items. So that's the codes menu. Data display, let's click on that. It'll give you engine data, misfire data, evap data, EGR data, fuel trim data, and acceleration or accessory electrical theft deterrent data. So if we start with engine, we click on that. This gives us our PID list. So there's everything that's going on with the car. So if I start the vehicle up, you'll be able to see all these numbers start changing around, and they'll start moving according to what the sensors are reading. So that's our PID list. So we back up and we go to misfire data, and we click on that. And this will tell us if there's any cylinders that have been misfiring. And right now, none. Probably because we just cleared everything out. But if we did have a cylinder, you'd say cylinder number 2, and then whatever misfires there are on there. Usually when you're running an engine, you'll have 1 or 2 misfires on each cylinder. I don't usually worry about it until it's well over 100 misfires. Then you think you might have a problem. So that's the cylinder misfire data. evap data, so that's the evaporative emissions system, which we will cover later on in the quarter. And this will give us information on tank pressure. This is fuel tank pressure, fuel pressure or fuel level sensor, and then whether or not the test has been run, all that kind of stuff. So just a lot of information on your evap system. And then EGR, same thing. And we can actually, this actually has an EGR valve on this engine, so we can actually control the EGR valve with the scan tool as well, with the bidirectional communications. But this will tell us all the information about the EGR. So if we're looking to diagnose EGR, that's a good place to go, because it'll give you all that information. Then fuel trim data, and I've mentioned fuel trim a couple times in class. Fuel trim gives you information on what the fuel delivery is happening right now. So you see the oxygen sensors are actually, this one's actually working a little bit because the heater's on. I've got the key on, engine's off, but the heater's on, so that's causing the oxygen sensor to read something here. But you got short-term fuel trim, long-term fuel trim, and the fuel cell, fuel learn. So we'll talk more about how fuel strategies work on the engine, but this is where you can read them, is right here. It'll tell you injector pulse width, so how much fuel is the injector putting in, and that kind of stuff. And you can scroll up and down. There's a lot of information on this page as well. So you got your idle air control motor position, coolant temperature sensor, engine coolant temperature sensor, intake air temperature, all that kind of stuff. It's all on this, the fuel trim data. And then this is for electrical, like chassis electrical stuff, like your theft deterrent systems and active suspension systems, stuff like that. So let's back up one more screen. So that's data display. Now let's go to functional tests. This is kind of a fun one. So we click yes on the functional tests, and KP or CKP variation learn. This is your crankshaft position sensor. This is what some crankshaft position sensors actually have to be programmed once you replace them, and so this is where you would go to do that. Calibration, this tells you what calibration you have in your PCM. So if I needed to flash the PCM to put a new program in it, this tells me what program I've already got in it. So if I'm doing a factory update or something like that, I can go here and I can see what program I've already got in the PCM. And then evap system test. So this is the test you're going to use later on in the quarter when we start talking about evap systems. You're going to need the scan tool to actually perform a lot of the tests you have to do on the evap system to diagnose it. And it gives you a little commercial here that your fuel tank has to be between 15 and 85% and yada, yada, yada. So if that's all right, then you can say turn off ignition for wait 10 seconds and turn it back on, and then start the engine, and then it'll run through the test and it'll give you the information on the evap system. So we'll spend more time on that as the quarter goes along. I just want you to know where it's at. Injector balance test is something else that you'll be doing as we move along through the quarter. So we click yes on that, and we can turn off the injectors. So ensure that the fuel lines are connected and the fuel pressure gauge is connected up to the engine as well. And I'll demonstrate that as we how to actually do this test. But you can turn off or turn on or turn ignition on. The engine must be off, and we click yes to continue. And so that just tells us that yes. Okay, so if we select injector number 1, yes. So it just primed that injector, and so now what we can do is we can fire that injector. So once you click yes, then you look at the fuel pressure gauge that you would have hooked up, and it would show you how much fuel volume went through that injector. So you can actually look and see if all of the injectors are flowing at the same rate, which is kind of cool. So that's the injector balance test. And then output controls. This is for other components, both in the engine compartment and stuff. So like for instance, the cooling fans on the radiator. So if I want to see if the high-speed fan works, I can just click on that, say yes. It loads it up. And So I'm going to click on, because the on is highlighted, so I just click yes. And as you can hear, the cooling fans kicked on. So now I'm going to turn them off, and the cooling fans go off. So that right there tells me that the high speed on the cooling fans work. Both cooling fans work, so if my cooling fans are giving me a problem, I know it's not the fans, because they work. It might be an electrical issue. So those are different things that you can control. We back up one more screen on this. So that's the cooling fans. You can do fuel pump relay, so you can actually turn your fuel pump on this way. You can force it into closed loop. You can force it into open loop. So lots of different things that you can do. You can reset your fuel trims on here as well. So those are all different options that you have available under the output controls. And then this right here just displays the VIN. So there's your VIN number. And so that tells you if the PCM is correct. Because if you are working on a vehicle that somebody grabbed a PCM out of a junkyard, you might have the wrong PCM in there, and that might be why your engine's running bad. So you can check the VIN number in the PCM and compare it with the VIN number on the car. That's just one example of why you would want to look at the VIN number. So, and then generic functions, we can go there. This is where we get into mode 6. Remember, there's actually several different modes. Mode 6 is the one I'd mentioned in class, and that's the $06, and that's your onboard monitoring system. Freeze frame data is actually mode 2. Oxygen sensor monitoring is mode 5. So mode 6 is kind of an interesting one here. That's the one we'll talk a little bit more about. We'll spend a whole chapter on it. But you got O2 monitors, EGR system, evap system, catalytic efficiency, and heater element, or heater current. So that's all part of mode 6 that you can look at the tests and everything. So if we check the O2 heater activity, it'll tell us, okay, here's the monitoring system. So sensor heater system time to activity, and then it'll tell you the value is 0, minimum is not available, maximum is 0. So if the value is 0, maximum, there is no minimum. So 0, that should mean that it passed, and it did. So it passed. So on this particular example, the system tested it, or the PCM tested the system, and it passed. So that's how you would do that. And we'll look at that a little more in detail, like I said. So that's, go back here, that's generic. And then troubleshooter. Engine. So this gives you some code tips, some symptom tips, time savers, different things like that. So we'll just go into code tips real quick. And you plug in whatever code it is you want to look at. So air fuel metering, ignition system misfire, we'll just go with that one. So code P0300, which is random misfire, right here tells you maybe what to look for. So one thing I really like about these scan tools, these aftermarket scan tools, sometimes they give you a little service information, save you some time. You don't have to run over to the all data machine and pull up the service information there. So let's back up out of these screens here. And that's pretty much wraps it up for the menu items on these. The thing with scan tools is you really need to plug them in and play with them. You got to poke around. You're not going to hurt anything if you just don't try and reprogram a PCM. That's the only thing I'll tell you. Other than that, you're not going to hurt anything by just poking around with the scan tool. So I'm going to make another video that shows the Virus and then the Tech 2, and those are the scan tools we have here at the school. So that concludes this video.